Wazazack.
Wazazack?
Wazazack, yes.
Teddy is with us from Hunger Free Vermont, and have you met?
Sort of informally, yes, but never formally like this.
Okay, well, would you like to hear us introduce ourselves?
Sure.
Okay, well, why don't we go around? Representative Levitt, you want to kick us off?
Josie Levitt, Grandel Chittenden, which is all of Grandel County and a sliver of West Milton.
Mike Rice, Bennington Rutland District, Andy Dorset, Landgrove, Mount Tabor, and Peru.
John O'Brien, Windsor Orange 1, Royalton and Tunbridge.
Esme Cole, Windsor 6, Hartford.
Heather Supernat, Windsor 4, Barnard, Pomfret, Bridgewater.
David Durfee, Bennington 3, Shaftesbury, Glastonbury, and Sunderland.
Rodney Graham, Orange 3, Williamstown and Chelsea.
Jed Lipsky, Lamoille 1, Stowe.
Henry Pearl, Danville, Peacham, and Cabot.
Charles Wilson, Caledonia 3, which is Linden, Sheffield, Wheelock, Sutton.
David Templeman, Orleans 3, Brownington, Barton, and Westmore. Thank you.
Okay. So we've got about 45 minutes, and I don't know how much time you would like to have with us. We'll be happy to invite you back if we don't get to cover everything. And we're a group that likes to ask questions. So if it would be better to hold questions until you've had a chance to present, we can do that. Or if it's okay to interrupt, we can do that too.
I'm okay with little interruptions, so that's totally fine. Feel free to ask your questions. For the record, my name is Teddy Wazazack. I'm the Universal School Meals Campaign Manager with Hunger Free Vermont. And just for the heck of it, I live in Barrie City. So I'll try to give some time back. I'll try not to take the full 45 minutes. I know this is going to be a conversation that's going throughout the session, and I could literally talk about universal school meals all day. So I'll try to respect your time, and I just want to start quickly with introducing myself, who I am and why I do this work, because I think it's very important I think stories are important, and I think motivations are important, and I think it's important to know why we all approach this work the way we do. So my mom kicked me out when I was 15 years old, and I was on my own after that, working my way through high school and some of college, sleeping on friends' couches, using the goodwill of some teachers in the school district, helping me find places to live while I worked my way through all of it. And I was one of the kids who fell through the cracks of the old system of school nutrition and school meals. I was far too proud at 15 to declare myself officially homeless, but I also did not have a stable parent or guardian to fill out all of the paperwork that's necessary. So for most of those years that I was on my own, I was also very hungry because I was usually eating at work. I worked in various fast food restaurants or wherever I could, and I would eat there when I could, but I did not have access to school meals. Even though on paper I definitely should have, the old system allowed folks to fall through the cracks. And that's what universal school meals just completely eliminates. And that's why I love my job. So the documents, I submitted 2 documents to the committee. We don't have to go through them. I just thought they would be helpful for reference as we move forward. The first one being a summary of S100, Act 151, as well as some of the other steps the legislature has taken over the past 2 years to fulfill the vision of farm fresh school meals for all. And that's really what universal school meals is. It's a part of a larger package of legislation that includes a local purchasing incentive, farm to school and early childhood grants, and the Universal School Meals Program. The legislature has already taken action on the local purchasing incentives and the farm to school and early childhood grants. Those have been in place for 2 years. And that's the mechanism that helps more farm fresh, good, nutritious food flow into the schools and that all students then get to equitably access. So in terms of the report from the Agency of Education, I don't really have anything more to add to it other than it was great. It was all great news. It was great to see the participation rates for both breakfast and lunch going up as a result of S100. The Medicaid direct certification and the coming lowering of the CEP threshold is going to be huge for the state and is going to incredibly positively impact the overall cost of universal school meals for the state of Vermont. And I want to highlight at the very end of the report, before all the charts started on, I believe, page 14, the agency points out that we are the only state to require the maximization of federal funding as part of our universal school meals program. I believe Representative O'Brien asked the question about other states that had been doing universal school meals. And I shared with him that both Maine and Massachusetts in New England have universal school meals right now, as well as California, Colorado, Nevada. There are bills moving in Minnesota and Virginia and New York. So the state of Vermont, not Hunger Free Vermont, the state of Vermont is leading the way nationally for showing how a universal program can and should be run. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention is that School Nutrition Day at the legislature will be next week. That's the 25th. I've been working with the chair to get some testimony scheduled so that you can hear directly from school nutrition directors across the state. I can talk until I'm blue in the face about why this is a good idea and how all the pieces work together. But the school nutrition folks will be able to actually tell you what's going on in the cafeterias, how important and impactful this has been for students and families in their own communities. So that will be next week on the 25th. They'll be in this committee, and I'd be happy to arrange a lunch meeting or anything if folks wanted to have conversations with them outside of the formality of the committee. I'd be happy to arrange that too. So, yeah, I just have to pretty much say that thank you to the Agency of Education for all of the work they did in putting together the report, especially the Fill Out the Form campaign. In talking to some of our partners in other states, there have been in some of these other states more acrimonious relationships between advocacy groups and the Agency of Education. That has not been the case here. It's been great to work with Rosie and her team and everyone else at the agency on the Fill Out the Form campaign and getting this program working and operational in schools. They've just been great partners with Hunger Free Vermont. So I just really want to make sure the committee understands that it was a team effort and we could not be more grateful to all the work that the agency did. So with that, I would be happy to answer any other questions.
Representative Levitt?
This might be really elemental, but you have universal school meals for a year. What is it going to take to have this be something that lasts? Are we going to have to re-up this every single year? Or like, what do you guys want to have happen to make this last longer than a year?
So what Hunger Free Vermont would like is to see a bill that establishes universal school meals as a permanent program going forward, permanently funded off the top of the education fund.
Okay.
The legislature is going to have a lot of conversations about the structure of the education fund. And, in final reading, we read yesterday about the reports that are coming out. But the education fund is a fundamental piece to this because funding from the education fund symbolizes correctly that school meals are just part of the school day. It's an educational expense. The kids cannot learn if they are hungry, and they need the breakfast and lunch every day to be able to successfully do their jobs as students. And the education fund is the most equitable mechanism to fund those programs on a statewide basis so that those who have more are paying more, those who have less are paying less. And we're not bumping the bill down to local school boards so they have to have an uncomfortable conversation of, well, we can't afford universal meals and the arts program and the state ended funding. So we're going to either have to take away the arts program or take away the meals. And it's not fair to the local school boards to put them in that position to ask the taxpayers to make up that difference there. So a permanent universal school meals program, most of the language that was passed in S100 is great. And we'd love to see some of that continue on permanently. And the permanent off the top funding from the education fund is what we're looking for.
Representative Templeman?
So you've mentioned breakfast and lunch, and I know that you're just trying to make that work, but to add a dinner option to that, is that a possibility?
I will say I don't know because I'm not sure about how dinner programs relate to school nutrition programs as far as the federal government is concerned. Mm-hmm. So what makes S100 and universal school meals work is the relationship between participation rates in breakfast and lunch and reimbursement rates from the federal government where folks are categorized. I believe that there is some other federal program which helps schools do after school, afternoon, evening meals, but I just don't know off the top of my head the rules and regulations around those.
Very good.
I meant to ask. What about feeding kids during the summer?
Oh, yes, that was in the report as well. Congress has taken a lot of good action actually on summer meals so that kids will And this past year, in fact, they did. Any kids who qualified for the free and reduced lunch were able to get those meals during the summer too. And I believe Congress expanded that eligibility.
Okay.
So that kids can eat during the summer and when they're at school. I think that was part of the pandemic EBT program, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
Which is finite and.
Yes.
Right, so that's something we might want to make a note of to find out more about both, I think, after school and then some.
And also, what about vacations?
Yeah, times when school's not in session.
Okay. I'd be curious about that.
Representative Wilson?
Yes, is this for kids in school or kids in general, or it's located in and around the schools?
In and around the schools, yes. During the first year of the pandemic, when universal school meals was in place as part of the federal waivers, you saw a lot of, we all saw them in our communities, the school buses driving around and delivering meals to coolers at the ends of driveways and things like that. But as of right now, it is school, because pretty much all schools in Vermont are fully back open. And so as you'll remember, as Rosie mentioned yesterday, it's all public schools in Vermont, and then independent schools under Act 151 had the option to opt in if they were taking publicly tuitioned kids, et cetera. But it's all the action is happening in the schools in the cafeteria.
So we had another party in here addressing school lunches, free school lunches, and they mentioned that the break period is between 20 and 25 minutes. Being hungry is an act of violence. Having to eat fast, I also see as a lesser act of violence, but is there any discussion around extending these periods so that kids can actually sit down and eat in a calm manner rather than
Hunger Free Vermont has not had any of those conversations.
Yeah.
Initially, it was something that sort of came up peripherally last year in terms of, what counts as education time. And that's why, breakfast after the bell was important, because it allowed students to pick up their breakfast in the cafeteria, go back to the classroom and sort of munch on their breakfast as class was getting started and homeroom was getting organized and stuff. So we haven't had any, we haven't specifically weighed in one way or the other. I personally think that it's a great idea to have kids have more time to eat, and that's great. But that wasn't really a part of any of the legislation of S100.
Representative O'Brien?
Ted, just to play devil's advocate for a second, what are the advantages to universal school meals as opposed to if we sort of had amazing participation with the free and reduced sort of target audience? I mean, we know some of these like stigma, maybe if Vermont farmers are actually supplying food, the more meals we serve, the better for Vermont farmers. But I'm sure there's some things I don't know.
Yeah, so I think that starting with my own story, someone who falls through the cracks, it just eliminates that. We can try to play with income thresholds or make paperwork more or less acceptable. But when you have any kind of means tested system, you're going to have folks fall through the cracks. And I would argue that school meals are not one of those things that we should be creating a threshold or letting folks fall through the cracks. When there is, if there wasn't a universal school meals program, okay, maybe we have to play around the edges and figure out how to solve this, but we have the solution being universal school meals. And, it's also that argument of feeding wealthier families, right? When the truth is that there aren't that many extremely wealthy families in the state of Vermont, if we're being very honest, as well as the fact that the universal program brings in more federal money than a non-universal program. So we're actually getting more money into the state of Vermont as part of universal school meals. And I have a handout for that, which I can supply to the committee, that demonstrates how basically a universal program brings in so much extra federal money that you leave on the table if you try to go down a hole of means testing or adjusting averages or anything like that. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, well, that's the farmer part, but also are there studies done on nutrition? Because I can imagine that those two meals are potentially far more nutritious than a lot of those families are getting at home too.
Yes, and there is, I believe one of the documents I submitted was a summary of findings of a bunch of studies involving universal school meals. And there is a study which shows that school meals, actually even before universal school meals was put in place, were more nutritious than meals that were brought from home. So when you accept that fact and then add in the local purchasing incentive and farm to school grants, it's like a snowball effect. Not only are more kids eating, but the food is healthier and so on.
Can I play devil's advocate one more time?
Yes.
And I got this a lot in my district, and it's funny, I live in Grand Isle, and we are like, shocking poverty in Grand Isle. But people are saying, well, why am I paying, like, I can afford to pay, or my kid doesn't need a meal because we can afford it. Is this, what effect is this having on my taxes? And how do you counter someone who says, well, why are you feeding every kid when maybe 10 kids or 30 kids can pay for it themselves? So how do you balance that?
I think that ties back to the federal funding piece, to the fact that when you do try to cut out those 30 kids, the amount of time and work and money that's spent cutting out those 30 kids then forfeits a whole bunch of extra federal money. And I would also say, frankly, folks who are under the old system who were paid and who were paying, they're kind of getting double charged for school meals because they're paying their taxes, which helps supplement the free and reduced kids in the first place. And then they're also sending their kids with a couple bucks to the cafeteria. So that family is actually paying for school meal programs via their taxes already. And then they have to send extra money to the school to get that meal that day. Whereas a universal program funded off the top of the ed fund, everyone is paying as much as they can all at the same time in the same way. And all the kids are getting the same benefit.
And how much has it looked like it's cost so far this year?
Universal school meals?
Yeah, is it going to hit, because you guys had pulled like 26 million or 29 million?
Yep, the legislature approved last year 29 million. And Rosie said in her report that as based off the projection she has now, it will cost 27 and change. So there is a little bit over $1 million money there that will be unspent. And as Rosie underscored yesterday, that this is preliminary data that we have at the beginning of the school year. And if participation goes up significantly over the next 2 months, it's possible that whole $29 million will be used, but it said in the report yesterday as well that the agency does not expect to hit that 29 million.
Representative Rice?
Can you just talk a little bit about the local purchasing incentives and
to
farmers?
Yes.
Why universal school meals supports that more?
Yes. One of my favorite parts.
I was going to ask the same thing. I don't think we really had any conversation, so.
Oh, okay, great. So just to just give a little history then, the bill was what we now consider the Universal School Meals Bill was first introduced, I believe, in 2019 as Farm Fresh School Meals for All, which was one big bill that had universal school meals, a local purchasing incentive for schools, and farm to school early childhood grant funding, all in one big bill. Over the messy process that is the legislature, the local purchasing incentive and the farm to school grants were pulled out of the original Farm Fresh School Meals for All bill and passed as, I believe, the miscellaneous ed bill, which was H47 a couple of years ago. So the local purchasing incentive and the farm to school grants have been in place for 2 years already. And the Farm to School grants is pretty much exactly that. It gives grants to early childhood and schools to help set up local purchasing things. But the local purchasing incentive is a direct reimbursement. And how it works, or how it worked when it was passed, was that basically if you buy 10% of your food locally, you get 10 cents in reimbursement for each meal. 15%, 15 cents per meal. 25%, 25 cents per meal, et cetera. And so what that does is it provides a financial incentive for the schools. The more local food they buy, the more additional funding they are getting from the state to do that. And so when you do that to scale, when you apply that on a statewide basis, like you do with universal school meals, it not only increases participation rates, which bring in more money to the schools, that allows the schools to buy more local food, and then that the local purchasing incentives adds to that and makes it much more affordable for schools to bring in locally purchased farm fresh foods.
And do you have data that shows how much money is being spent in local farms through, but by schools versus before that was passed and.
Yes, so there's, yes, and. Before the pandemic, before universal school meals on a statewide, there were already a certain set of schools through CEP and other things serving universal school meals. 64% of those schools reported that their local food purchasing went up as a result of going to the universal school meals model. And I believe, I'll go out on a limb here, and I believe the local purchasing incentive money has been fully spent by the legislature the past two, like the amount that was allocated. No, okay, and I'm being told that that's not completely true. So, but yes, there are studies in there that show the tie between local foods and the schools.
Thanks.
Representative Cole, did you have a question?
Sure. One thing I'm wondering about is, of course, we do not have control over the federal government, but are there chances that that amount will fluctuate? And so we won't always be able to rely on that, or how consistent do you think that will be?
The federal reimbursement rates for, I think Rosie shared yesterday that those rates generally go up. I don't know of a time when the reimbursement rates have been cut. And I also make it a habit not to predict what's going to happen in Washington. But so as part of, the broader question of universal school meals, it was discussed on a federal level, like as part of Build Back Better, and then that all fell apart. And so I think that the most surety we can have when it comes to federal action is what Rosie shared yesterday about the Medicaid Direct Cert and that CEP. The threshold for that will be lowered by some amount, which has not been shared with us yet. But those two actions alone will dramatically help with the cost of universal school meals on the state level.
Great, thank you.
I was going to ask also if you could elaborate on that point a little bit more too. So we heard that information from Rosie, and I'm not sure that it's for those of us who are still getting used to learning about the bill that we passed, and then how those what the two ways of participating are, and how those two changes might make a difference. If you would you mind just walking through that quickly again? I think the more times we hear it, the more sense it will make.
I will do my best, and I will underscore that Rosie knows all of this much better than I do. But basically, for universal school meals, there are two options: Provision 2 and CEP, the Community Eligibility Provision, which is technically Provision 4 under the big federal bill. How the community eligibility provision works is that's the cheapest and best option for schools and school districts and the state to do universal school meals. And how CEP works is that when 40% of your school district, your grouping of schools, if you have a school district that's 4 schools, you can group 2 of them together and ignore the other 2 if you so wanted. If 40% of the student body is directly certified, meaning they hit one of the categories that, whether they are in at-risk youth or in the foster care system, et cetera, if they're on 3 squares, they are automatically directly certified to receive free and reduced lunch. The federal government's threshold for that is 40%. Once you hit that 40%, you can do universal school meals, and the federal government pays for most of it. Provision 2 is on a student by student basis, and it's you haven't hit that 40%. So tell me what your percentage is, and we'll give you things based on that. What Medicaid Direct Cert is going to do is it's going to allow the children on Medicaid to be directly certified for school meals. That will help schools get closer to that 40% threshold. So let's just say there was a school that was at 38% free and reduced. There's 3% of students who are on Medicaid. That gets them now to 41%. They now qualify for CEP and can draw down a lot more federal money than they could before that 3% of Medicaid Direct Cert kids were counted as part of the 31. So when you take that fact with the fact that the CEP threshold is going to be lowered, and as Rosie said, we don't know if that's going to be 2%, 5%, 10%. Regardless, the threshold is going to be lower, and there's going to be more kids counted to meet that threshold. So that is a winning equation for the state. And that was it's also sort of residual conversations from the Build Back Better Act, but it's neither here nor there.
So the impact of that would be less state funding needed to continue providing universal meals. Yeah.
Yep. Less state and more federal.
Right. Yeah. Good. And I was just going to say that we don't know what the number will be yet. It's 27-ish now, and it may go up, it may go down. The projection, what we budgeted was 29. And my recollection is that, of course, nobody could tell exactly what it was going to be, and there was a range that was given when JFO did they did as they always do, a projection. And then they said, well, if you had to pick a number, which you'd have to do, 29. So kudos is what I want to say to JFO for so accurate, for really, coming up with a number in what was in a new, newish. Representative Levitt.
One more question. I'm curious if you have any data on the incidence of childhood behavior that's getting better because so many kids now are being fed.
Yep.
And is there less of a need for paraeducators? Because it turns out maybe these kids don't need paraeducators. They were just hungry and acting out.
I'm not sure about the second half of that question. As far as I don't know, and I don't want to make assumptions about any school district. But yes, there are studies that have shown that behavioral issues, like the actual recorded amount of disciplinary issues schools have, go down when there is universal school meals. And then there's also more anecdotal data that's quantified, but more based on anecdotes of in-classroom behavior. Teachers just reporting that it's easier to manage the classroom in the morning when all the kids have already had breakfast and after lunch and so on. So, yeah.
Great question.
Very good question.
Other questions?
I used to be a teacher.
It shows.
Representative Cole.
One side question here is, I'm curious if there's any educational aspect incorporated into this language for the kids and for.
There hasn't been educational like within mandated in the legislation, but we have heard really cool stories, and you'll hear some of them next week. One, for example, one school in Addison County was able to buy fresh green peppers as part of, because they had universal meals, they had more money to play with, they were able to buy fresh green peppers. And a student came in and they were serving them as a side one day, just raw, crunchy green peppers. And they had never had green peppers before, and they just loved them. And they went home and told their parents how much they love green peppers. And that student now brings green peppers in a little Ziploc bag for their snack every day. So there's things like that. And there have also been instances of school nutrition folks getting out of the cafeteria and into the classroom and doing lessons on nutrition and food health and all of those types of things. So while I don't necessarily have like studies or data for that, you'll hear stories about that hopefully next week.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you for sharing your personal story.
Yeah, thank you.
Very helpful, and thank you for the overview. I know that you had there's a couple of documents you mentioned that are posted now on our committee page. Without walking through them, can you just tell us what they are, so when it's still fresh anyway, and we can look at them after.
Yep. So the first document is a summary, basically, of S100 Act 151 from last year, and it just has a couple bullet points of what the legislation actually did for schools, and it also talks about some of the local food purchasing and farm to school grants as well, and it explains what happened there. And then the second one is really just a long list of studies and data that have been done, talking about student behavioral health, talking about universal school meals has been proven to increase English language arts learning and math learning by 10 weeks, which is equivalent to the summer loss. So universal school meals also basically eliminates the summer learning loss, which is just a really cool fact. So there's a whole bunch of, it's pages of studies about universal school meals and school nutrition programs.
Yes, Representative Lipsky.
Yeah, I apologize. There's been a lot of reference during your presentation to Rosie. And I personally have been inundated with so many witnesses and guests. I'm not placing Rosie.
Yes, I apologize. I should say Ms. Kruger from the Agency of Education. She was the woman who was in here the other day when the fire drill went off.
Right.
Reporting on, so yes, excuse me, Ms. Kruger from the Agency of Education. Yes, and she's, I believe, a childhood nutrition programs director. I think that's her title. It's weird that I know that, but I think that's her.
Thank you.
Yes, Representative O'Brien.
What's the budget for the ed fund, or you know, to give some context to this, and it's a lot of money, $27 million, but in the big picture of education, it's, right,
Right, well,
small percent.
yes, and last year, as y'all know, there was $100 million surplus in the education fund. And that's sort of what the off the top language of the education fund allows, is it allows the legislature to be more dynamic within the education. The education fund and the structure of it is extremely complicated, and and I always like to say that it's not the kids' fault that the education fund structure is really complicated. And we have to figure out a way to address that while also feeding the kids. So that's sort of like a workaround of your question. I don't actually know, like off the top of my head, how big the education fund is this year. I know there was just a report given.
It's like 2 billion or something?
It is a very large number.
Yeah, that's what I've been told.
Yeah, universal school, I would,
Huge.
without going into like actual numbers, I would venture to say that universal school meals is a drop in the bucket of the overall fund. And one that is, I think, very worth the investment. Because, like the ed fund is meant to pay for things that help kids learn. Like that's its purpose. And kids cannot learn if they are hungry. They just can't. And so in order to make sure that we're getting the strongest return on investment that we're getting for all the rest of that's not $27 million, if you want to get the best bang for your buck, the kids are going to have to pay attention in class and be present when they're in school. And universal school meals accomplishes that. So I see this 27 million, let's call it, as really shoring up the investment in the rest of the ed fund.
Well, we can get an answer to the precise
Yes.
size of the ed fund, but I think that's, ballpark-ish. That's about whoever said 2. That's about right, yeah. But I just pulled up something that seems to confirm that, so.
What's interesting in towns, like Tunbridge, we spend, I think, 800,000 administratively running the town, with like 1.1 million doing the roads and 7 million on our schools. So it's just amazing. You'll have 80 people come to a school meeting and nobody opposes the budget. And you have huge battles over class 4 roads.
Our state.
Yeah.
Great. Well, any final questions? We'll have to, we can talk later. Thank you. But great. Well, we'll be seeing from you again, hearing from you again, seeing you again, and committee, we'll hang around for a couple minutes. And thank you.
Great, thank you. And feel free to reach out with any questions, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to credit Representative Lovett for suggesting if we had extra time when witnesses were done to not just standing up and leaving right away, but seeing whether there were any just not questions necessarily, but thoughts or observations, things that we might want to follow up on. I know there were a couple of questions that we didn't necessarily have immediate answers to that might be useful to dig into more after school. So how this relates to after school programs or times when school's not in session, behavioral issues and how the impact there. I think that's a really interesting question. Representative Lipsky.
Just a comment. I'm sorry that the witnesses are still here, but that was a particularly riveting presentation. From my perspective, I have served on school boards and care about the efficiency of education. So kudos to Teddy. Powerful.
Yeah. Representative Pearl.
I was gonna go back to the Farm Bureau thing, just a thought on that, if that's all right.
Yeah.
It was kind of related to Esme's question about policy that we could do, something we've talked about on this committee before. And it came up when the president was talking about the $17 an hour plus housing. Housing is obviously something we've talked about, or we have talked about in the past, and is a place that feels like, we probably can't really do anything as immediate at the pay scale, but providing better access to housing, or there's Act 250, things that maybe just as a thought, well, that's fresh in my mind, that maybe we should talk to. And we talk to people last year, I don't know if you can remember, Heather, some people came in and talked about like having people, community people, help build housing, I'm not recalling some talks about that we never, I don't know if you remember, Rodney, didn't we have?
We had Todd.
We had talks about it, but that was.
On my notes.
Yeah, we talked about that before and obviously maybe it didn't come to fruition, but it was just a thought. That might be someplace that feels like maybe we could help more, because.
It's interesting because he didn't seem to mention housing as an issue, but all of the farmers in my district are desperate for housing. So I think you've hit on something that could be really significant.
And it's a big, in Vermont, that's a big piece of the cost. Like I've thought about it on my own farm, like bringing somebody on, I'm like, what can I pay somebody and provide housing? And I'm like, well, that's heat in a place, rentals are impossible around the whole state. Insulation, all those things, like providing good housing, that's a big, you got $17 plus, I don't know, calculated.
I have a crazy idea. What if, because the one farmer I know, she provides tiny houses for her farm help. Is there some way we could tie a workforce development bill? I know when the women's prison, before they moved, they were building modular homes. Is there some way, either in the men's prison because they have the space, or the women's prison if it ever gets built, where we could have folks build tiny houses that could then be used for our ag community in a way, or I'm trying to think, how could we combine those two things or even teach it at a trades and in the high schools or at the tech schools, build some tiny houses, get some experience, and then they could be sold at market rate to help keep funding the program, but also then maybe a reduced rate and the farmers could apply for a grant and then they could have tiny houses for their folks. Just trying to combine a couple of.
Representative Lipsky.
It's a question to Henry and everyone else in the room that was listening when you were talking about this, the 1699 plus some air travel and maybe housing. But did he say the housing value was deducted?
Yes.
As a cost, meaning maybe they're getting 17 an hour, but how much were they deducting for the cost?
I didn't hear that.
I thought that was implied.
It was implied, so that's what I was getting there.
So if they're making $17 an hour and they're deducting housing, they're not making any.
And travel, I believe.
I don't know, that's why I'm asking.
I think he said it was a plus.
Yeah.
Oh.
I think
Yeah.
the requirement is they pay them $16.99, they provide housing, they provide travel.
Flight.
Oh, okay.
So it's an addition?
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe.
Wow.
We should check on that.
So David and I had a different take on that.
Yeah, thanks for clarification.
Well, let's reach back out to them and ask.
I actually asked Heather the question because I wasn't sure if I'd heard it correctly or was interpreting it correctly. So we should get, but it seems like, well, we'll get a definitive.
And that's just for the H-2A visas. That's not for regular farm workers. And the one question I wanted to ask him was, what is the quality of your housing? Because when I was at the Pride Center, we did a grant. We got a $300,000 grant to help LGBTQ migrant farm workers who were housed like 10 to a trailer, which was rife with sexual assaults. So you sort of want to think, how safe is your housing?
Yeah.
And is it up to code? And what are the challenges that everybody on both sides is facing?
I am glad to hear this conversation, and I think it's important and shows what we're concerned about, and certainly ties into the workforce question. I will check, but I think that possibly the Housing Committee has primary jurisdiction over this subject, which is not to say that we can't talk about it and think about it and maybe provide some input on. Representative Rice.
I have something to bounce back to universal school meals if that is a conclusion of that.
Yes, yeah, I think.
Just speaking to Esme's question about, is there sort of educational language? Since we've heard that universal school meals is such a drop in the bucket in the education fund, I wonder if it would be worth talking about actually adding some kind of language and therefore funding for introducing structured programs in schools to talk about some of the things that get to the education piece that Henry talks about all the time, the sort of food systems, really talking about where the food is coming from, how it's grown, how it gets to the school, then how it's prepared in the school. And sort of like really, I know that a lot of these schools are doing it, but I get the sense, and perhaps we can ask the next week when the folks are here from the schools, we can ask sort of how that works. I get the sense that a lot of it is sort of when they have time, they're doing it because it makes a lot of sense and it's really great to do and the kids love it, but it's not structured or funded. And so can that be a piece tucked into Universal School Meals to really sort of provide funding and structure to make sure that that's happening in all the schools and not just the ones that have the capacity to.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
So, right, we might want to hear from other folks at the agency, education agency about what sort of standards there are right now statewide that are taught to in that area. Good. Other questions?
Just one more comment I had on the whole sort of farm worker issue is a couple of years ago, I talked to Amy and Earl at the Stratford Organic Creamery, and they were paying $15 an hour at that point. Couldn't get workers because it's just the money thing. Like if McDonald's is starting at $17 an hour, and they said, drywallers are getting $25 an hour. Farm work's hard, and so like it's almost like a farm worker would have to be like, it's important to work, so I'm going to work for less. And I don't even know where you begin to compete with that, because farmers don't have extra money, whereas the building industry has paying clients who pay pretty well.
Maybe they should find reps to do it. Given we're so poorly paid.
Do they have any farming component curriculum in any high school or tech school in Vermont? I'd be curious.
There are, some of the tech centers, CTEs do have ag
Okay.
programs. And there are, I don't know. I don't really know. I know in my own district what has been offered over the years, but I'm not sure how broad it is. So, yes, Representative Wilson.
Does anybody actually know? I mean, I'm not against people on farms and housing, and I'm not against any of that. But does anybody know where all our workers went in the first place? Farms, painters, plumbers.
I think we're aging out.
Aging out is
a bit.
part of it, but older people, those are the older generation deciding not to go back to work or retiring earlier after the pandemic. I've seen that a couple of times as one explanation.
And the JFO, I think, did a pretty good analysis as well. So like in numbers, like what has happened in the past several years, I think. I don't know exactly where, does anyone know where that might be?
I think it's in their fiscal report they did.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So
that they'll print out.
Pulling that up and just having it handy might be helpful for us too.
Also, we're the second oldest state in the country.
What is an older person?
That's a really good. I think it's over 65.
Oh.
And I know Grand Isle County, the median age is 68. So that is not exactly a youthful pool from which to find a farm worker. I know. So that could be part of it.
Just a comment on Charles's question, and this could be rife with complete inaccuracy and political incorrectness.
Nice.
You can hear.
Bring it on.
You go down to the fuel depot and you're filling up your truck, and I just heard this 3 days ago. I was putting fuel in my log truck. You go down to the trailer park where I live, this guy said, you see these giant TV screen boxes and all this, the new ATV. And that this family hasn't worked in 3 years, but they've been getting so much either COVID payment, but they're not going to work. So you could say, well, that's one accurate or completely ignorant observation.
So you're saying de-incentivizing work.
Well, there has been rhetoric in some camps that, and believe me, everyone in this room has heard it.
Yeah, it's a perception.
there's been so much payout that it's reduced poverty to some degree, but is it disincentivized, to your original question, Charles, people not working as hard as some of us are used to working 100 hours a week and have been for 50 years.
Representative Rice?
I would just ask us to refrain from pointing to individual or anecdotal situations in describing structural problems and which require structural solutions, right?
I take that as, I apologize. I was just trying to bring up rhetoric that's out there.
No, yeah, no, I wasn't asking for an apology. I
No, I do
don't,
apologize.
don't bring it up, don't bring up what you've heard. I'm just saying, I think that that kind of rhetoric tends to be structured around pointing to individual or anecdotal situations that people may have seen, may or may not know, what's actually going on and what we actually need to be addressing is sort of the structural problems that lead to poverty, to
Fair, I do.
issues in the workforce.
I do apologize. I'm just trying to figure out why.
Representative Cole?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up as well. And I totally agree with your point too, that it's so good to be cognizant of the sort of dialogue that is happening and then going back to the data piece. So what is the reality, given that is the dialogue that we're hearing right now? Like looking at like the JFO, like what are they seeing? Like who is benefiting from these supplements that we've been getting from COVID and other things, and how sustainable that is. So I don't know if folks who have been participating in that for a certain amount of time for perhaps good reason as well, because they did issue those payments for reason to what they analyzed would help the economy, but to make sure that people aren't taking advantage in ways that are not beneficial to all of us. I think going back to the data and looking at, are there loopholes that we should be thinking about or perhaps not thinking about because it is like myth. But some of it ties back to just frustration. Like it's a bummer that we can't find the people right now too. So like comparing that with whatever the reality is, whether that is absolutely correct or whether there's more data to support it. Yeah.
Representative Bradley, did you have a question or want to say something earlier? I wasn't sure if I saw your hand.
I think if you go back 50 years, families don't have as many children as they used to have. They don't raise as big of families as they used to have. They can't afford to. So having the neighborhood kids to come work on the farm in the summer, they're not there because we're not growing our workforce here in Vermont.
That's a really good point.
Representative Super.
Yes, I'm really grateful for this conversation, by the way. And also, I went onto the H2A work page and found that housing is not permitted as a deduction from pay, so it is an additional, just to add that clarity.
Okay, great.
And did you see travel detailed?
Travel is required, but it does not say anything about whether that is deducted from their pay.
I see.
It just says housing specifically is not allowed to be deducted.
Thank you.
But I can send this fact sheet out to
Oh,
Alora, and so everybody has the chance to see it.
that'd be great.
Mike?
Just a brief committee policy piece. I would love to make sure we're getting back to having everybody in the room ID or introduce themselves.
Having everybody sitting around?
Yeah.
Okay.
Before we speak.
Just so we all know who's in the room all the time.
Great, yeah, good. So it's never too late, and we met Teddy earlier, but folks over here, if you wouldn't mind telling us just who you are and who you represent, if anyone?
I'm Mike Bald. I live in Royalton, so John's my representative, and I just came in to hear the conversation today. I actually raised my hand to say that I think the questions the committee asks are outstanding. They're appropriate, and I'm very impressed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm Amy Schollenberger. I'm a lobbyist and I represent Hunger Free Vermont, and just to flag also the Farm to School Network that can answer some of the questions, and also Vermont After School, who can also answer some of those questions. So I can.
Good, yeah, thank you. And thank you for raising that. Yeah. John?
One thing on Mike, if we ever want to talk about invasives, he's the guy to talk to.
Yes.
But also, I was thinking about data versus anecdotal, and it's interesting how oftentimes they both exist, I think. And so something like childcare, if we get back to, if you have two children, it starts to make more sense to stay home than pay, say, $12 an hour for your kid going to childcare, because all of a sudden you're up to $24 an hour and you're over, financially. It just becomes like, impossibility. So there goes your workforce.
Well, obviously there's no one answer to that extremely complex question, and but good to have that conversation. It's 12, so we should probably stop, and we'll be back here at 1 to hear from several folks representing Conservation District.